This is a presentation of the Sports Source Digital Network, presented by Hearthside Bank.
What's the single best performance by a VFL in a Super Bowl game? We'll tell you next. Hey everybody, this is Next Level. I am Vince Ferrara. This show concentrates on VFLs currently in the pros in all sports. Appreciate you joining us. Be sure to subscribe. Sports Source Digital Network on YouTube. Rate, share, comment, all those fun things that will help the show grow. We appreciate it. We've had some fun. 2 shows so far and excited about today's show. Joining me here in studio from the Knoxville News Sentinel, knoxnews.com. Adam Sparks. Adam, appreciate the time.
Real good to be here. Good to be talking about the big game coming.
We are talking about the big game and wanted to tap into Adam's insights because we're going to look and focus on VFL, the best VFL performances in a single Super Bowl game all time. So let's jump in and we'll start at number 5, the 5th best performance by a VFL in the Super Bowl. How about Jamal Lewis, the 21-year-old going for over 100 yards? And Adam, this is a tough list, but when you look at Jamal Lewis, what he meant to that Baltimore Ravens team that was about defense and running the football, impressive for him to do what he did in that game.
Yeah, I mean, anytime in the Super Bowl, if you can do something distinct, unique, I think it sets you apart. Jamal was at the time, the youngest player to score a touchdown in a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. Jamal was the second rookie in Super Bowl history to rush for 100 yards. Timmy Smith was the first one, Super Bowl 22 with the Redskins. But yeah, his impact on that team, I think, you can't tell the story of that Ravens team in that season without Jamal Lewis. You know, there was the Ray Lewis team, there was the defense team, and we remember that team and that Super Bowl run mostly for that. But that's not possible unless there is a ball control, steady, powerful running back on the offensive side. If you remember, that was an exceptional quarterback play out of that team.
Trent Dilfer.
Yep. So they had to lean on the running game. Jamal was a rookie, as you mentioned, ran against a stacked box all season, including that Super Bowl, and to grind out 100 yards as a rookie, scoring a touchdown, they had to have that in that game for the defense to do what it did to win the game.
Yeah, that was a unique Super Bowl 35 in 2001 in Tampa, my hometown, and it was one where you finally saw that, hey, you don't have to have an elite quarterback to win the Super Bowl because Trent Dilfer didn't have the big stats, and he won. They had Priest Holmes on that team as well. So Ray Lewis ended up being the MVP. So that shows you, yeah, he had a great individual game, but it was still about the defense of that game.
And it was an exception to the rule. Again, yet we think about that team as them winning with defense, and that was the exception. You mentioned before that and after that, you won with quarterbacks.
Right.
All through the 90s, certainly into the 2000s, and today with this game, you're relying on a quarterback. But it wasn't just the defense. It was the running game. And, you know, as good as that defense was, do they win the whole thing that year without a run game? I think they could have won that game without a run game.
Right.
I'm not sure if they get to the Super Bowl without a run game because they had to do something on offense. And the fact that they had that much trust in Jamal Lewis as a rookie to put it on his shoulders, I think says a lot. And really, when you're talking about best performances for VFLs, if you run for 100 yards plus and a touchdown in the Super Bowl, that gets you a check mark.
At 21, not a bad thing as well. All right, number 4, we're going to go back a little bit farther. Jack Hacksaw Reynolds, what better nickname is there for any VFL, back in Super Bowl 16 in 1982 for the 49ers. And this is more about the statement that defense made more so than like individual stats like a Jamal Lewis.
Yeah, I love this one because if you go back to like the first 20 years of Super Bowl history, if we go back to then and ask people, and you can go back and read this, of what's the greatest sequences in Super Bowl history, the goal line stand in Super Bowl 16 that was led by Hacksaw Reynolds, was one of the top ones in. We think about the early Super Bowls as Bart Starr and Joe Namath and Lynn Swann and all these epic plays. A goal line stand in Super Bowl 16 was right in the middle of all those, on the greatest of all time. We tend to forget about it because it was so early. It was Super Bowl 16, 49ers against Bengals. Bengals are probably the better team. They're driving. They get almost to the goal line. They get a new set of downs, and they get 4 tries to punch it in, which for a score that probably would have won the game. Hacksaw gets a stop at the 1-yard line on 2nd down. Hacksaw, again, gets the stop. Him and Ronnie Lott rammed the running back at really the 1-foot line, the 1-inch line on 4th down.
Yeah.
And that ended up winning that game. And, Hacksaw did a lot of other things. He played in 3 Super Bowls. He started all 3, one with the Rams, 2 with the 49ers. He was a leading tackler in that Super Bowl 16. He also had a sack. So he had a great, great career. But that was the play, that was the sequence, that goal line stand.
And if they don't have that and the 49ers don't go on to win that game, I mean, what happens to the 49ers and their dynasty and the legacy of Joe Montana, all those things after that?
Yeah, I mean, we find out years later that Bill Walsh was kind of iffy on Joe Montana at the time. That's crazy to say now of what he did, but he was iffy on Joe Montana if they don't win that game, and it was a low-scoring defensive game. If they don't win that game, does he stick with Montana through the 80s? Is Bill Walsh, who we find out he is, if he loses that game? They get Jerry Rice 3 or 4 years later. Is Jerry Rice ever a 49er? Does any of that happen if they don't win that game? I think you can argue that it probably doesn't, and it hinges on a couple of big tackles. A great game, but a couple of big tackles right at the goal line by Hacksaw Reynolds. And I told you this as we were leading up to this. I have a particular memory about this. I was too young to see that game, but my elementary school, growing up in Tennessee, I remember my elementary school, the library had a book of greatest Super Bowl moments. And the cover of that book, this is in the 80s, was that epic photo of that goal line stand and the 49ers lying on their back celebrating, and Hacksaw Reynolds was right in the middle of that. So my first memory of great Super Bowl moments was that. I didn't know Hacksaw Reynolds was a VFL at the time.
Right.
But I found out after the fact. I think that's his spot in history. I think that's why you have to include him on the list.
Yeah, great story, and it just shows that sometimes moments can be weighted a little bit more than overall stats. All right, at number 3, we go from as far back as we could go to the most recent we can go to Jauan Jennings, the Juice Man, 3rd and Jauan. Last year's Super Bowl, just the 2nd player ever to score, to catch a touchdown and throw a touchdown. What a game by Jauan Jennings, even though it was in a losing effort.
Yeah, I mean, Vince, didn't we all have the same thought? I'm speaking of people in Tennessee. The same thought during that Super Bowl is that if the 49ers win this game, Jauan's going to be the MVP of the Super Bowl.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, the only other case is Christian McCaffrey, who he
Right.
threw the touchdown pass to. If McCaffrey scores the game-winning touchdown in overtime, I think you could make a case it could have been him.
Right.
But Jauan had as much of a chance to score the game-winning touchdown as Christian McCaffrey did.
Right.
He was a leading receiver for the 49ers in that game. He catches the touchdown pass. He throws the other touchdown pass on a trick play. He was, in terms of the goal line, I mean, Jauan Jennings was the go-to guy for them in more ways than one. Of course, also, any of us that know Jauan's history at Tennessee, I know some of his history. I worked in Murfreesboro at the time when he was a star quarterback.
Yeah.
Really good passer at Blackman High School. And when we saw that play, we all thought Josh Dobbs.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, we had seen that before. And so everybody around the country saw it and thought, whoa, Jauan Jennings can throw the ball. We already knew that.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of those differences, too. If he has that game and just a playoff or regular season game, it's a great little story. People forget it. Mm-hmm. But when you do something unique in the Super Bowl, it elevates you. And, I wish they would have won it for Jauan's side because his game was a great game, win or lose. But, he's the MVP, I think, if they pull out that game in overtime.
Yeah, we mentioned receiving touchdown, passing touchdown, 4 catches, 42 yards in the game. 124 million people saw it, so they got a chance to really learn about a VFL in Jauan Jennings. And then also you think about where he came from doing that social media video and getting suspended and off the team, and Jeremy Pruitt actually doing the best thing during the tenure and bringing him back. And then using that Super Bowl to a career year this year is just such a cool story.
Yeah, I mean, the dog, as the kids say,
Yeah.
the dog in Jauan Jennings, I think, really jumped out. I mean, if you remember, like, the touchdown catch that he made in that Super Bowl, he was dragging guys to the end zone.
Yeah.
And that's what I think of Jauan Jennings, that, like, I'm just going to accomplish this regardless of the obstacles. The fact that he did whatever his team needed to do to throw the pass for the touchdown. And I think that just spoke to a lot of what we already knew of that player. And, you know, he'll be, win or lose, he's going to be, that Super Bowl, he's going to be, you know, an answer to a trivia question, you know, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And that speaks to the difference that he made in that Super Bowl.
All right. Someone that always made a difference anywhere he played, including the University of Tennessee's their top 5 VFL performances in the Super Bowls. The great Reggie White, the Minister of Defense, Super Bowl 31 back in 1997. I mean, this is where you get back to the individual numbers with 3 sacks, but it was much more in his story in that performance at number 2.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get to this, but we can argue Reggie White could be 1.
Right.
Depending on how we, like, say, performance, moment, and all these sort of things. I think of that Reggie White performance as just absolute dominance. That's the word. The 3 sacks, I don't think, you know, the websites were around to count hurries and all that.
Hits
in
on the
90s.
Quarterback.
But he had a lot.
Yeah.
He dictated that game. He was the best player in the NFL that year. He had one of the more dominant performances in the Super Bowl ever. 3 sacks is still second all time in Super Bowl history. And he was unblockable. And I think that's what I remember of him going around the end, going up the middle.
The club move.
The club move, absolutely. And hitting Drew Bledsoe in the knees where you thought that may have ended his career.
And today that doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But Reggie got away with it at the rules at the time. But I think also of Reggie's place in that franchise, they were not going to win a Super Bowl unless they had a dominant performance like a Reggie White.
Right.
You know, Brett Favre was not going to do it on his own. They had to have that guy. And, you know, we speak of moments, and when I think back to that Super Bowl, I think of the 3 sacks, and I think of his dominant performance. But as much I think about him running around the field afterwards.
Right.
I think with the celebration T-shirt, the champion T-shirt on, but holding the Lombardi Trophy up. And, you know, when Super Bowl Sunday comes, we look at all these epic shots of over the years, and one of them is always Reggie White holding up the Lombardi Trophy. And, you know, that's why I think he's sort of in his own place in VFL history in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it had been 29 years since they had won it, and obviously started out winning the first couple of Super Bowls. And then he wasn't the MVP. Another one you can make a great case for, Desmond Howard had 254 return yards or something like that in that game. So that's probably why he didn't get it, and it went to Desmond Howard. All right, at number 1, and yes, there could be some debate on this, but going with Peyton Manning, Super Bowl 41. This was the first Super Bowl win for Peyton Manning with the Colts, and this one was one that kind of got, not kind of, but it definitely got a lot of people off his back just because of the narrative of what was there for him until he broke through and won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think this is one of those where the narrative definitely adds to the performance.
Right.
Peyton had a good game. He didn't have an epic 400-yard game that we had seen him have so many times before. It was in the rain. You weren't going to do a whole lot anyway. It was kind of a sloppy Super Bowl in terms of the weather. But Peyton had to have a Super Bowl win. I've had this debate with other Vol fans that, you know, his last Super Bowl, some people think, was the more important one because it was a good story. It was his last game. He was going out a winner. I think it's this one because, you know, he was going to be in one of 2 lists, one of 2 categories, I think, in NFL history. He was either going to be in the list of guys that were the best not to win a Super Bowl, Dan Marino, Jim Kelly, Warren Moon, or he was going to be the next list up, which is the best of all time. And without winning that first Super Bowl, a Super Bowl at all, I think he never gets to that top list. I know that's hard to say and sometimes hard to hear, but I do think it just catapulted his career to another place. It's a weird thing, but I think it even affected Peyton after his career. We think of him as like the best pitch man in media these days, right? a lot of Peyton's humor is self-deprecating. If he doesn't have a Super Bowl win, I think that comes off differently.
Right.
He's more of a sympathetic figure. Instead, he's, people can argue it's him and Tom Brady, 1A and 1B, the best of all time. He's not on that list, and he's not in that conversation unless he wins that first Super Bowl.
Well, it's crazy. He was taking, with that narrative, took a lot of criticism. And, obviously that made a lot of people uncomfortable and unhappy that, hey, why can't he? Yes, it's not just about, individuals. It's a team game. But why isn't he? Look at all the stats. Look at everything he does. So to get that monkey off his back and to break through, I'm with you. I think that has a lot of value. 25 of 38, 247 yards, a touchdown, interception. You talked about in the rain and beating the Bears, who didn't have maybe the greatest image either at the time as an opponent, but he was MVP, and that also is another thing that notches in his favor.
And something I remember of that game is that, so all of us that had seen Peyton play for so many years, you wanted him to get that one, right? You're rooting for him. And you wanted to have him to have this unleash of emotion after it. Similar to maybe like how John Elway did when he finally won the big one.
Yep.
We actually didn't get that from Peyton. I remember him being humble, modest, giving credit to Tony Dungy and to his teammates and all that sort of thing. And he looked satisfied, but he didn't take on a lot of the credit for it, even though he was the MVP, even though he was the best player in the NFL, even though he knew he was a first ballot Hall of Famer with or without that win. And so I think in a similar way that we saw with Jauan Jennings, I think we saw Peyton Manning's character come out in what he did in the Super Bowl. Very confident, but also very humble. And that's how he celebrated finally getting that big win.
All right, so we went with Peyton Manning at number 1, Reggie White at 2, Jauan Jennings 3, Hacksaw Reynolds at 4, Jamal Lewis at 5. What do you think about the list? Would you have a different number 1? Hit the comment section there under this video and give us what your number 1 would be, whether you agree or whether you would have a different number 1, or which one you would go with. All right, there may be others that our viewers are saying, hey, what about this? What about this? What are a couple honorable mentions that just maybe missed the cut with our top 5?
For moments, I loved, for performances, I liked Willie Gault.
Yeah.
Willie Gault had more than 100 yards, had an epic catch of 60-something yards in Super Bowl that the Bears won. I love the moment of Alvin Harper scoring a touchdown for the Cowboys in the early 90s. I like that particularly because I remember him dunking the ball over the goalpost.
Yeah.
That was replayed on NFL commercials for like a decade after that. But I'll give you a couple of guys that I'll bet most of the viewers are not going to pick out. Mickey Marvin, offensive tackle, Raiders. Raleigh McKenzie, guard for the Redskins.
Okay.
And this is in the Trey Smith conversation. These are two offensive linemen that are never going to get the accolades like they should because they're offensive linemen. They don't have stats. But at the time, Marcus Allen, 191 yards, had the rushing record in the Super Bowl. We all remember that play where Marcus Allen is backtracking and going the other way. His tackle in that game was Mickey Marvin. Best rushing game in NFL history, and there was a VFL at offensive tackle and dominated that game on the offensive line. You fast forward like another decade or something, Marcus Allen's rushing record is broken by Timmy Smith. Over, I think it was 204 yards, Super Bowl 22. That was behind the Hogs, right? The Redskins offensive line. The guard, who also dominated that game, was Raleigh McKenzie out of the VFL. So you have two offensive linemen that dominated in the Super Bowl, but were never going to get accolades because they were part of an offensive line. Trey Smith, if he wins a third Super Bowl, he's with those guys. He's a dominant offensive lineman that's part of a great team, and in this case would be a part of a dynasty.
Well, maybe Isaiah Pacheco will raise the bar and set the new record, and we can give credit to another VFL. So great transition. What do you think about the historical impact of Trey Smith if he gets another Super Bowl as a VFL with the Chiefs?
Well, I mean, I think the initial question is, like, where is he in history? Because this would be 3 for him. I think it really quickly leads to the next question. He's a really young guy.
Yeah.
Would he win 4, 5, 7? I mean, I don't know.
Depends on where he goes because he may not be with the Chiefs. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it depends on where he goes. It depends on the impact he makes on that team. But, I mean, he's you could argue he's the best guard in the NFL right now. And he's so young and he has so much time left. that we talk about, like how many could Mahomes win? How many could Trey Smith win? And he's going to be viewed, he's already viewed as an elite player right now for his position. He's going to be viewed even higher than that if he wins it. And, you know, if we're doing this list next year or a couple years from now, Trey Smith could be top 5, even though he's an offensive lineman. He could climb up there and push for Reggie if he has this type of success over the next decade.
Yeah, and he would be the first VFL, since Bill Bates, and then only the second all time to win 3 Super Bowls. So special company to keep for Trey Smith. All right, well, tell everybody about your work. You do an awesome job as a Tennessee beat reporter for the beat writer for the Knoxville News Sentinel, knoxnews.com. Where can people find your work, and what are you maybe working on here coming up?
Yeah, in print, the News Sentinel, online, knoxnews.com, on socials, at Adam Sparks. A lot of my colleagues, Mike Wilson and Cora Hall, are covering UT basketball and the Lady Vols right now, obviously 2 really good seasons.
Yep.
My side of it, for football, we're doing a lot of analysis on the recruiting class, on the transfer portal, and Tennessee strategy and roster building. I think that's a pretty big topic right now with NIL transitioning to revenue sharing. A lot of Tennessee fans have questions, so we're trying to answer them.
All right, very good. Adam, thanks for the time. Appreciate it. Awesome job.
Good to be on.
All right, and be sure to check out the Sports Talk on with John and Vince with myself and John Wilkerson each weekday morning, 6 to 9 on 99.1 The Sports Animal. John and I will have Tennessee baseball right around the corner on the Vol Network with those calls, and then, of course, you can see me on the Sports Source with John Pennington and the crew. Again, be sure to subscribe at Sports Source Digital Network. Look for Next Level, and then be sure to share and comment with anything you'd like to say about the shows. Next week, we will start getting into some of the VFLs in preparing for the NFL draft and look at some of those VFLs in the NFL. I'm Vince Ferrara. This is another edition of Next Level. Thanks for watching. Wait, we got a bonus for you. Look at that. Memorabilia of Jack Hacksaw Reynolds, VFL, on our top 5 list. John Pennington doubted that he actually saw the car, so he sent him this and said, look, I really did actually saw off a car. And then he sent him another one saying, well, actually, it was a 53 Chevy Bel Air. How about that? Jack Reynolds to John Pennington, sending him this to verify that he, in fact, did earn that Hacksaw nickname. Pretty cool stuff here in our studio.